Austin in the summer, it always felt like a promise. The air thick with possibility, the scent of petrichor after a sudden downpour, the hum of live music drifting from every open door. That's where I was, 30 years old, clinging to a dream as fragile as the strings on my acoustic guitar. I was Leo, just another struggling musician among 1,000 in this town, but I believed my songs were different. They were my soul laid bare, full of the kind of poetry that only comes from living and hurting and hoping. I poured my life into those melodies, into lyrics that twisted and turned like the Colorado River itself, searching for the deepest currents of human experience. My tiny apartment, cluttered with notebooks, half-empty coffee cups, and a worn-out demo recorder, was my sanctuary, my studio, my entire world. Then Clara walked in, or rather, she drifted in like a wisp of smoke from a sage smudge. We met at an open mic night at a dive bar called the Cactus. I was playing a new song, raw and exposed, and I saw her in the back, leaning against the wall, her eyes locked on me. She had this magnetic energy, a kind of fierce, restless spirit that pulled you in. Afterwards, she came up to me, her smile a flash of brilliance in the dim light. "Your words are like daggers wrapped in velvet," she'd said, and I was hooked. It felt like she saw me, truly saw the intricate, messy heart of my music. We started spending all our time together. She was an aspiring singer-songwriter too, though her style was more polished, more pop-leaning than my folksy, indie sound. But we clicked, creatively and personally. Our nights blurred into an endless loop of songwriting sessions, fueled by cheap beer and the shared thrill of creation. I'd play a chord progression, a nascent melody, and she'd hum along, sometimes suggesting a word, a phrase, a shift in rhythm. It felt like magic, like we were two halves of a whole, our energies intertwining to birth something new. I truly believed she was my muse, the missing piece that would unlock the next level of my artistry. I shared everything with Clara, not just the melodies and lyrics, but the fragile, often terrifying dreams I harbored about my music career. The fear of failure, the gnawing self-doubt, the desperate yearning to be heard, to have my songs find their home in the world. I told her about the rejections, the small victories, the constant struggle to pay rent while chasing an intangible dream. She listened, always, her eyes wide and attentive, her hand often resting on my arm, a silent promise of understanding. I felt seen, supported, loved. She even started recording our sessions, saying it was to keep track of our ideas, so we don't lose any gems. It seemed like a sensible, even practical, suggestion at the time. A record of our shared journey, our shared ascent. I had never felt so creatively free, so understood. It was a beautiful lie, meticulously crafted, and I swallowed it whole. Our creative synergy deepened. We'd stay up until the sun painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, fueled by countless cups of coffee, the air thick with the scent of old paper and new possibilities. I'd lay out my rawest emotions, my most vulnerable confessions, shaping them into melodies that felt like they were torn from my very core. Clara would listen intently, her face often alight with what I thought was shared passion. She'd always have her phone out, sometimes propped on a stack of books, sometimes just casually resting in her lap, recording our conversations, our improvisations, my fragmented thoughts. "It's for inspiration," she'd say, "so I can capture the vibe, the spontaneous genius." I never questioned it. Why would I? We were in this together. Every rough demo, every whispered fear about signing a deal or failing entirely, every intricate lyric I painstakingly crafted, it all became part of our shared world. I showed her my journals, my voice memos from years past, every seed of an idea I'd ever planted. She encouraged me to explore deeper, to bear more, to reach for the most intimate corners of my experience. "That's where the real art is, Leo," she'd often muse, her voice soft and encouraging. The buzz around my music was growing. Small gigs turned into bigger ones. Whispers about my poetic lyrics and soulful melodies started making their way through the Austin music scene. I'd sent out a new batch of demos, material that felt stronger, more refined than anything I'd done before, much of it shaped during those late-night sessions with Clara. A few labels had shown interest, and I remember calling Clara, my voice shaking with excitement after a particularly promising meeting. "Asterisk, we're so close, Clara. This is it. Our chance." Asterisk, I'd said, still thinking of it as ours. She'd congratulated me, her voice a little too calm, a little too measured, but I dismissed it as her usual cool composure. She'd always been the more outwardly reserved one. Inside, though, a flicker of something unsettling, a tiny discordant note, had started to play. Sometimes, I'd catch her looking at me with an intensity that wasn't quite admiration, more like an analytical gaze. I told myself it was just her artistic mind at work, dissecting the nuances of my performance, planning our next move. But it was there, that subtle, almost imperceptible shift in her energy, a slight tightening around her eyes when my name came up in a positive light, a fleeting shadow across her smile. One afternoon, during a particularly intense songwriting session, I was struggling with a bridge for a song about lingering regrets. I played a melancholic chord progression, humming a half-formed melody, and Clara, from across the room, suggested a specific lyric, a metaphor I had scribbled in a notebook months ago, a very personal image I had shared with only her. Like a ghost in the guitar strings, Leo, she'd said, almost too casually. It sent a shiver down my spine, a strange mix of recognition and unease. How had she remembered that obscure line? And why did it feel like she was pulling it from a file, rather than from shared memory? I pushed the thought away, telling myself she was just incredibly perceptive, our minds truly aligned. The truth was, she wasn't just documenting. She was cataloging, curating, building a case. And I, in my naive hope and boundless trust, was unwittingly providing all the evidence. The record deal was just around the corner, a bright, shining beacon on the horizon. I was so focused on the light that I couldn't see the deepening shadows around us. The call came on a Tuesday. My agent, buzzing with an energy I hadn't heard from him in years, practically shouted down the line. Asterisk, they're offering. A major label, Leo. They love Ghost in the Strings. They want to put it out as the lead single. Asterisk, my heart hammered against my ribs, a wild drum solo of pure elation. This was it. Years of grinding, of pouring every ounce of myself into my music, were finally about to pay off. I called Clara, my voice thick with emotion, barely able to string words together. We did it, Clara. We did it. I kept repeating, still clinging to that idea of we. She offered a quiet, almost wistful congratulations, saying she was happy for me. I attributed her subdued reaction to her usual calm demeanor, unable to comprehend the storm that was about to break. The storm hit like a rogue wave, swift and brutal. I was scrolling through my social media feed, basking in the glow of congratulatory messages, when I saw it. An article from a small indie music blog. Clara Monroe, the voice Austin's been waiting for. My fingers trembled as I clicked. And there it was, an album announcement. Whispers of Dawn, by Clara Monroe, available everywhere next week. My blood ran cold. Whispers of Dawn. I'd worked on a track by that name with her, a soft, introspective piece that was unmistakably mine, born from my melody and my lyrical sketches. I clicked on the embedded track, my stomach lurching. The opening chords hit me like a physical blow. It was my song, my melody, my arrangement, only sung in her voice, with minor tweaks to the lyrics. Then another track, Echoes of Doubt, which was almost identical to a demo I'd recorded only a month prior, complete with a guitar riff I'd spent weeks perfecting. And then Ghost in the Strings. My Ghost in the Strings, note for note, lyric for lyric, only it wasn't my voice. It was hers. The world tilted, my vision blurred, a hot, bitter taste flooding my mouth. It felt like someone had ripped my heart out and was playing it on a broken record player. I stared at the album art, at her smiling face, a mask of serene triumph. I messaged her, called her, my hands shaking so violently I could barely type. No answer. She had blocked me. I called my agent, trying to make sense of the incoherent babble escaping my lips. He was already aware, his voice grim. The label was on the phone, confused, alarmed. When I finally confronted her, it wasn't in person, but through a devastating public statement she released, carefully timed to coincide with her album's release. She claimed I was trying to steal her work, that I had merely helped flesh out her ideas. And then she provided the proof. Snippets of our recorded conversations, heavily edited, skillfully manipulated. My voice, discussing her ideas, my suggestions, my vulnerability, all twisted into a narrative where I was the opportunist, trying to claim her genius. There was a particularly damning clip where I was brainstorming lyrics, running through different options for a chorus, and she had layered it with a recording of her singing the final version, making it sound like I was struggling to articulate her already perfect lines. The online mob descended like vultures, fueled by outrage and a thirst for instant justice. I was labeled a misogynistic plagiarist, a talentless leech preying on a promising female artist. The record label, terrified of the public relations nightmare and legal battle, dropped me faster than a hot potato. My dream, once so vibrant and tangible, shattered into a million irreparable pieces, leaving me adrift in a sea of accusations and despair. The following weeks were a blur of numb disbelief and crushing reality. My apartment, once a haven of creativity, became a suffocating tomb. I couldn't touch my guitar. The sight of it, leaning in the corner like a silent accusation, was too painful. Every chord I ever played, every lyric I ever wrote, felt tainted, stolen, worthless. The Austin music scene, which had once felt like home, now felt like a viper's nest. I saw the whispers, felt the judgmental stares when I dared to step out for groceries. The online hate was relentless. My social media was a cesspool of vitriol, strangers calling me every name imaginable, dissecting my character, condemning me based on Clara's carefully crafted narrative. I deleted my accounts, wanting to disappear entirely. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped caring. I lost my part-time job waiting tables because I couldn't pretend to be human anymore, not with that hollow ache in my chest and the constant replay of Clara's smiling face on her album cover, a mocking symbol of my stolen life. My landlord called, wondering about rent. My friends tried to reach out, but I pushed them away. How could I explain the depth of the betrayal, the insidious nature of it? It wasn't just my songs she'd stolen. It was my trust, my sense of self, my future. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life, invisible and unheard. The silence of the apartment was punctuated only by the ringing in my ears, a constant reminder of the music that was no longer mine. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I'd wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I could hear her album playing faintly from a neighbor's window, the sound of my own creation used as a weapon against me. It was a kind of torture I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. I questioned everything, every interaction, every kind word she'd ever offered. Had it all been a performance? A calculated manipulation from the very beginning? The thought was a poison, seeping into every corner of my mind, leaving me raw and exposed. I was blacklisted, broken, and utterly alone, drowning in a despair so profound it felt like I would never surface. Weeks bled into months. I existed in a fog, a dim, listless shadow of my former self. The music inside me, once an unstoppable current, had dried up completely. I'd pick up a pen, try to jot down a thought, and nothing. Just an empty page, reflecting the emptiness inside me. I was ready to give up, to leave Austin, to walk away from everything I'd ever loved. The thought of starting over, of being someone else, felt like the only escape from the suffocating weight of my ruined reputation. Then, one evening, my apartment door creaked open. It was Marcus, a sound engineer I'd worked with on some of my earlier demos, a quiet guy with kind eyes and a knack for making even the roughest recordings sound vibrant. He'd brought a six-pack of my favorite local brew and a pizza. He sat on my threadbare couch, not saying much at first, just observing the wreckage of my life. "Leo, man, what happened?" he finally asked, his voice soft, genuinely concerned. I mumbled something about everything being over, about being a fraud, about Clara. He listened patiently. Then he leaned forward, his eyes serious. Look, I know what they're saying. And I know Clara. But I also know your music. I remember working on those early tracks with you. The ones that sound suspiciously like. Well, you know. A spark, tiny and almost imperceptible, flickered inside me. Remember all those voice memos you'd send me? The little snippets of ideas, chord progressions you were working on? You always dated them, even back then. And the project files? Every time you opened a session, it created a timestamp. He was right. I'd always been meticulously organized, almost obsessively so, with my creative process. It was my way of tracking my progress, of seeing how a song evolved from a raw idea into a fully formed piece. Marcus saw the faint glimmer of understanding in my eyes. Asterisk, we can prove it, Leo. You've got years of your life documented. Every original thought, every rough draft, every single goddamn voice memo. Asterisk, it felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. The despair didn't vanish, not entirely, but it receded enough for a fragile sliver of hope to break through. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about reclaiming my truth, my identity. Marcus, with his quiet determination, became my unexpected ally, my anchor in the storm. We spent weeks in my apartment, then at his small home studio, sifting through mountains of digital files, old hard drives, even dusty notebooks filled with my handwriting and timestamps. Early drafts of lyrics, sometimes years old, matched almost perfectly with what Clara had released. Voice memos from before I even met her contained the foundational melodies of her hit songs. Session files from my digital audio workstation, each with a creation date and modification history, clearly showed the evolution of the tracks, long before Clara had ever laid a claim to them. The more we uncovered, the clearer the picture became. A meticulously documented timeline of my creative process, a fortress of evidence built piece by painstaking piece. The realization was both liberating and heartbreaking. The truth was there, undeniable, but the journey to uncover it had been agonizing. The sheer scale of her deception, the calculated betrayal, solidified into an infuriating resolve. I wasn't just fighting for my career, I was fighting for my right to be an artist, for the integrity of my own story. Armed with an irrefutable mountain of evidence, my newly appointed lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman recommended by Marcus, filed a copyright infringement lawsuit against Clara. The legal machinery began its slow, grinding work, but this time, I wasn't fighting an invisible enemy. I had facts, timestamps, and a meticulously reconstructed timeline of my creative journey. We presented my raw, unedited voice memos, some dating back years before I met Clara, containing the nascent melodies and lyrical fragments that formed the core of her original songs. We showed the development history of my digital audio project files, the layers of instrumentation, the precise evolution of harmonies and arrangements, all clearly predating any involvement from her. Marcus's expertise was invaluable, explaining the metadata embedded in my recordings, proving the authenticity and chronology of my work. Clara's defense crumbled under the weight of the evidence. Her carefully edited recordings were exposed for the manipulative fabrications they were. When faced with the overwhelming, undeniable truth, she had no choice but to admit her deception. The public narrative, once so viciously against me, began to turn. News outlets, having initially condemned me, now reported on her fraud, her ambition having devoured her integrity. Her burgeoning career, built on a foundation of lies, ended before it truly began. The irony was bitter, a hollow victory. Justice was served, yes, but the scars remained deep, etched into my soul. The legal battle was draining, financially and emotionally. Even with the truth finally out, the major label that had dropped me was still hesitant, their reputation too important to risk on a controversial artist. But a smaller, independent label, known for championing authentic voices, heard my story, heard the strength in my music, and they offered me a deal. It wasn't the big break I'd once envisioned, but it was a chance, a glimmer of light in the darkness. I poured all my pain, all my anger, all my resilience into my music. Every late-night session, every tear shed, every fragment of my shattered trust found its way into a new album. I called it the Betrayal Tapes. It was raw, honest, and unvarnished, a sonic diary of my darkest period, infused with a newfound strength and defiance. Releasing it felt like shedding a skin, like finally breathing after being held underwater for too long. The Betrayal Tapes wasn't just an album. It was a catharsis, not just for me, but for so many others. It resonated deeply, hitting a nerve with audiences who had felt similar betrayals, whether in love, friendship, or their own creative pursuits. The critics praised its raw honesty, its poetic lyricism, its unflinching gaze into the darker corners of human experience. It became a critical success, and in a way, a commercial one too, finding its way into countless homes and hearts. Playing those songs live, night after night, I felt a profound connection with my audience. They weren't just fans. They were fellow travelers, people who understood the ache in my voice, the story behind the words. I didn't become a superstar, not in the way I'd once dreamed, but I found something more enduring: authenticity. The betrayal had stripped me bare, forcing me to confront my own vulnerabilities, to find strength not in external validation, but in the unwavering truth of my own art. Austin still hummed with music, but now it felt different. I found a new community of artists who valued integrity above all else. I learned to trust again, cautiously, wisely. The scars of that period remained, a subtle ache that would occasionally resurface, a reminder of what I had lost and what I had almost thrown away. But they were also a reminder of my resilience, of the fact that even after the deepest cut, healing was possible. My music was no longer just about ambition. It was about connection, about truth, about the power of the human spirit to endure and transform pain into something beautiful. I found healing in the melodies, solace in the shared understanding, and a deeper, truer connection with my own authentic voice. My greatest strength, I realized, had always been my unwavering belief in the story only I could tell.